Prepare to immerse yourself in a narrative that challenges established societal norms, breaks unspoken taboos, and makes the heart race with excitement and anticipation. Imagine an ordinary moment of daily life, taking a shower, that unexpectedly becomes a turning point in the destinies of two people. What should have been a simple hygiene routine transforms into a forbidden encounter, filled with hidden emotions, escalating tension, and a passion that shouldn't exist. Yet, this story is not just about the incident itself, but also about the difficult choices we make, the deeply buried feelings we suppress, and the unpredictable consequences we must face. Can the heart truly triumph over reason, guiding our desires down an unforeseen path? The sun slowly rose above the horizon, painting Clara's antique furniture with a soft, warm light. As every morning, she was in the kitchen, meticulously preparing fresh coffee. The aroma of ground beans permeated the entire house, creating an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. However, on this day, something intangible lingered in the air, foreshadowing a morning that might forever change her measured life, or so it seemed to her. Clara, a middle-aged woman with wise eyes and delicate wrinkles, had always prided herself on her composure and self-control. Ever since her beloved daughter, Julia, married Lucas, she had made every effort to maintain a warm and respectful relationship with him. Lucas, conversely, was the embodiment of energy, a spark of life capable of igniting everything around him. That day, Lucas decided to spend his free time in the garden, enthusiastically playing soccer with his friends. Their loud laughter and the rhythmic thud of the ball reached Clara, who watched from the kitchen window while washing dishes. She had always wondered how he managed to fill the house with life so effortlessly, unlike anyone else. Ignoring his magnetic presence was virtually impossible. After the game, Lucas entered the kitchen, slightly breathless and with beads of sweat on his face. Clara subtly watched him pour himself a glass of cool water. "It's really hot today," he remarked, wiping his face with the edge of his t-shirt. Clara offered a polite smile in return and refocused on the sink, trying to hide the slight tremor that invariably arose in his presence. It was something inexplicable, but she distinctly felt a strange, subtle tension hovering between them. A little while later, Lucas asked Clara if he could use the bathroom. "I accidentally left my towel in the laundry. Could I use your bathroom, Clara?" he asked in a casual tone. Clara, without hesitation, agreed. It was so ordinary and innocent that she couldn't have imagined this minor gesture might lead to unforeseen consequences. As he went upstairs to shower, Lucas left Clara alone with her thoughts. She found herself inadvertently pondering the events of recent days, how he had looked at her at the most unexpected moments, the fleeting compliments that seemed accidental. Was it merely a figment of her imagination? Perhaps. But Clara's heart began to beat faster every time they were in the same room. When Lucas finished his shower, something entirely unexpected happened. He came downstairs, drying his wet hair with a towel, and gave Clara a grateful smile. However, Clara felt strange, not because of the smile itself, but because of his gaze, deep, penetrating, as if carrying a hidden message. She tried to dismiss the feeling, but that fleeting moment seemed to imprint itself on her memory. The day continued as usual, but Clara couldn't get Lucas out of her mind. Every minor interaction with him seemed filled with hidden meaning and hints. That night, lying in bed, she struggled to fall asleep. It felt as though something forbidden, something beyond her control, was awakening within her. Clara couldn't help but wonder, did Lucas feel the same way? He acted so naturally and casually, yet there were moments when she was almost certain he looked at her in a particular way. These thoughts relentlessly pursued her, causing feelings of guilt and self-loathing. After all, he was her beloved daughter's husband. Any feelings beyond simple respect were utterly unacceptable. And yet, there was clearly a spark between them, something she couldn't deny, that same tension she felt every time he was near. The following days brought even more doubt and agonizing uncertainty. Clara tried to keep her distance from Lucas, avoiding prolonged conversations and chance encounters. However, each time, it seemed fate deliberately brought them together. In fleeting moments when they accidentally met in the hallway or kitchen, their gazes would lock, as if suspended in eternity. It seemed they both understood something, but neither dared to utter a word. The days dragged on in a restless anticipation Clara couldn't explain. She felt that Lucas's presence in the house had taken on a new weight, something she could no longer ignore. Every time he entered a room or walked past, she experienced a mixed feeling of anxiety and guilt, as if she were harboring a dangerous secret she dared not reveal. Tired after a long night shift, Julia lightheartedly recounted her plans for the upcoming weekend, but Clara barely listened. Her thoughts were far away, consumed by the complex feelings she harbored for her son-in-law. Suddenly, Lucas appeared in the kitchen, still looking as if he had just woken up. His slightly disheveled hair and simple t-shirt gave him a casual look, but Clara couldn't help but notice how comfortable he seemed in her presence. "Good morning," he said with a lazy smile, reaching for his favorite coffee mug. Julia smiled warmly in response, while Clara hastily averted her gaze, pretending to adjust something on the table. As time passed, the tension between Clara and Lucas became increasingly palpable, like a thick veil enveloping their interactions. Clara tried to distract herself from the growing discomfort by immersing herself in household chores, but it was futile. At the dinner table, while Julia enthusiastically recounted her professional successes, Clara caught Lucas's gaze. It was a fleeting, seemingly accidental glance, yet it made her heart pound like a caged bird. She tried her best to maintain an appearance of calm, but deep down she knew, something had changed, something subtle and beyond her control. That day, Lucas, as if trying to escape the thickening atmosphere, decided to go for a run. The scorching heat seemed not to bother him at all. Clara, pressing against the window, watched him put on his sneakers and adjust his headphones. There was a captivating strength in his movements that held her gaze, despite her inner resistance. When he returned, exhausted by the heat and breathing heavily, he immediately headed for the bathroom. Clara, in the living room folding laundry, couldn't help but hear the sound of running water. She desperately tried to ignore him, to focus on her tasks, but her mind, like a traitor, kept feeding her unwanted thoughts. Images she had previously pushed away persistently invaded her consciousness, causing her shame and self-disgust. After all, Lucas was her daughter's husband, which made her attraction to him utterly unacceptable. A short while later, Lucas reappeared in the living room, dressed in casual loungewear and giving Clara a disarming smile. "Thanks for dinner, Clara, as always, it was delicious," he said with such ease and sincerity that she almost believed everything was fine. However, for Clara, nothing seemed normal anymore. Every look, every word, every gesture of his seemed imbued with a hidden meaning that she couldn't ignore. As evening fell, Clara retreated to her room, hoping to find some relief from her tormenting thoughts. She lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Everything about Lucas, his smile, his infectious laugh, the way he awakened feelings in her that she shouldn't have, seemed to unleash something deeply hidden within her, something she had suppressed for years. Clara knew she had to put an end to it before it was too late. She needed to distance herself, to create an impenetrable barrier that would prevent these feelings from breaking free. But at the same time, a part of her desperately resisted this, a part that craved more fleeting glances, more casual conversations, more of this forbidden sensation that made her feel alive like never before. Lucas, for his part, seemed unperturbed by Clara's whirlwind of emotions, or perhaps he skillfully concealed his own feelings. He remained consistently kind and attentive, but sometimes something else flickered in his gaze, something Clara couldn't decipher, but which caused her anxiety. The night ended in oppressive silence. Clara could hear the muffled voices of Lucas and Julia coming from the next room. She felt guilty, like a traitor, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. She felt trapped, with no way out. Deep down, Clara knew this was just the beginning of something that could destroy everything she had built over the years, but which simultaneously felt inevitable. She stood on the edge of a precipice, and every step brought her closer to an inevitable fall. Clara, trying to distract herself from intrusive thoughts, busied herself with minor tasks and immersed herself in reading, but everything around her seemed to remind her of Lucas. His subtle scent seemed to linger in the air, and memories of his gazes made her heart beat faster. One afternoon, when Julia was at work, Lucas stayed home to work on documents in the living room, where his laptop and papers occupied the entire table. Clara was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she heard his voice. He called her with a casual tone, asking for help with a computer issue. She hesitated for a moment but, gathering her courage, replied that she would be right there. Entering the living room, she saw Lucas sitting on the sofa with a focused expression. He looked at her with a grateful smile. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't figure this out." "Could you help?" he asked, pointing to the monitor screen. Clara approached, feeling the tension in the air increase with each step. Leaning in to see the image on the screen, she felt the warmth of his proximity. Her heart pounded with double force, but she tried to maintain her composure. Lucas watched her carefully as she explained what needed to be done. His gaze was intense and penetrating, yet it did not cross any boundaries. However, Clara felt as if he saw right through her, as if he could read all her most secret thoughts. After finishing her explanation, she tried to quickly leave, but he stopped her with a simple remark, "You're incredible, you know." Clara froze in surprise. It wasn't just the words themselves, but how he said them. There was something else in his voice, subtle yet significant. Trying to hide her embarrassment, she forced a smile and replied, "It's simple stuff, Lucas, anyone could do it." But he shook his head, "No, not anyone. Only you." The silence that followed these words was heavy and meaningful, filled with feelings they both feared to voice. That night was particularly difficult for Clara. After dinner, she sat on the sofa, watching Julia and Lucas animatedly discuss their weekend plans. Looking at her daughter's happy face, Clara felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. How could she allow herself to harbor feelings for Lucas, knowing it could destroy her daughter's life? And at the same time, how could she deny what she felt? The situation reached a critical point one sleepless night when Clara went down to the kitchen for water and found Lucas there. He stood barefoot, dressed in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, with a cup in his hand. Seeing her, he smiled warmly. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, lowering his voice so as not to wake Julia. Clara tried to keep the conversation brief, but Lucas seemed to deliberately prolong the moment. He began to talk about his late-night work, how hard he was striving to secure Julia's future. Clara tried to comfort him, but the conversation gradually shifted to a more personal level. "And you, Clara? Are you happy? You always look so troubled." The question caught her off guard, and she couldn't immediately find an answer. Lucas's gaze was intense and penetrating, as if he was trying to discern something in her eyes. Before either of them could say anything, footsteps were heard from upstairs. Julia was coming down the stairs and asked what they were doing. Clara's heart pounded wildly, but Lucas replied with absolute composure, explaining that they were just talking. Julia smiled, suspecting nothing, but Clara knew that moment would forever remain etched in her memory. Clara's life had undergone irreversible changes. Every interaction with Lucas was charged with an electrical tension from which there was no escape. He was, as always, caring and attentive, but Clara caught subtle signs that betrayed his own feelings. His presence in the room thickened the air, making it almost tangible. Julia had left for work earlier, leaving Clara and Lucas alone in the house. Clara decided to use this moment to tidy the kitchen, arranging everything in the cupboards, trying to distract herself and not think about him, but her attempts were futile. Lucas entered the kitchen, offering to help. "It's all right, Lucas, take a break," she replied, avoiding direct eye contact. However, Lucas insisted and, picking up a cloth, silently began to wipe the table. Clara's heart beat faster. His proximity became almost unbearable, but she didn't know how to tactfully ask him to leave. The silence was broken by Lucas's voice, "Can I ask you something?" Clara looked at him with slight apprehension. "Of course, Lucas, what's wrong?" He seemed deeply thoughtful, as if choosing his words carefully. "Are you okay? I mean, how are you really feeling?" The question caught Clara by surprise. It was simple, yet it seemed filled with deep meaning. Clara tried to force a smile, but it came out unnatural. "I'm fine, Lucas. Why do you ask?" He shrugged, his gaze fixed on her eyes. "Sometimes I feel like you're carrying a heavy burden, as if you're constantly worried about something." Clara, pretending to adjust the silverware, replied, "Nothing special, Lucas. Just life." He didn't press the issue, but Clara felt that this moment had created an invisible bond between them, something intangible, but felt by both of them. Lucas spent a few more minutes in the kitchen, helping, and then left. Clara sat down, feeling tired not from household chores, but from the emotions raging within her. The evening passed in silence. Julia, as usual, animatedly talked about her work projects and weekend plans. Clara tried to keep up the conversation, but her thoughts were far away. She covertly glanced at Lucas, and it seemed to her that he was looking at her too, not openly, but in a way that made her heart pound wildly. When Julia, tired from work, went to bed early, Clara decided to stay in the living room and watch TV. To her surprise, Lucas decided to join her. He sat on the sofa next to her, maintaining a decent distance, but Clara felt his presence so acutely, as if he were much closer. "It's nice to have moments like these, isn't it?" Lucas broke the silence. Clara looked at him slightly bewildered. "What moments?" He smiled with a hint of sadness. "When you can just relax, without rush or expectations." Clara nodded, but his words seemed much deeper than they might have been. The ensuing conversation was casual, yet filled with hidden meaning. Lucas spoke of his childhood, of the difficulties he had faced in his youth. Clara listened with genuine interest, surprised by his frankness. It seemed he was sharing things with her that he usually kept hidden from everyone. When the conversation ended, it was late. Lucas stood up to go to bed, but before leaving the room, he looked at her and almost whispered, "Good night, Clara. May you have good dreams." The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. Julia, unaware of what was happening, continued to live her usual life, but Clara and Lucas felt a storm brewing. The tension between them became almost palpable, as if the slightest touch would be enough to shatter the fragile balance. On Saturday afternoon, Clara decided to work in the garden. This activity always helped her escape her problems and find peace of mind. As she trimmed the flowers, Lucas approached her with a chair and a cup of coffee. "I thought you might appreciate the company," he said with a shy smile. Clara tried to maintain a casual conversation, but his presence unsettled her. Lucas seemed so calm and natural that Clara began to wonder if she was overreacting. Perhaps her feelings were just a figment of her imagination, a projection of something that didn't truly exist. As she watered the plants, Lucas moved closer to help. And that's when it happened. Their hands accidentally brushed for a moment, and both froze. Neither said a word, but the silence that hung in the air was more eloquent than any words. This moment was brief, almost accidental, but neither could deny its significance. Clara nervously recoiled and mumbled that she needed to get something from inside the house. Lucas didn't stop her, but his gaze followed her to the door. Clara understood that this fleeting moment had changed everything, and deep down, she knew she was approaching a point of no return. After that incident in the garden, the line between what was permissible and what was forbidden began to blur. The tension between her and Lucas became more intense than ever, and they tried to avoid being alone together. But it was almost impossible. It seemed fate deliberately brought them together again and again. That very evening, Clara was in the midst of culinary preparations, making dinner. She sensed his presence even before she heard the sound of his voice. Lucas approached her with unhurried steps, expressing his readiness to help. "No need, Lucas," she said, without looking at him. Her voice was strained, bordering on trembling. Lucas caught it but chose to remain silent. As she was slicing vegetables, she felt him inexorably drawing closer. Clara realized it wasn't about the vegetables at all. A sharp pain pierced her heart, and the knife nearly slipped from her hands. She instinctively took a step back, trying to increase the distance between them, but Lucas remained still. "Clara, can we talk?" Lucas said softly, almost a whisper. She froze in indecision, not knowing what to say. "About what?" Clara asked. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "About this. About what's happening between us." Clara felt the ground give way beneath her. She shook her head negatively, trying to reject the obvious. "Nothing is happening, Lucas. You're just imagining things. But he didn't believe her. I know you feel it too, Clara, because I feel the same. Then, a heavy silence fell. Lucas's words echoed in her head, and she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. How had she allowed things to go so far? He was her daughter's husband. Any feelings for him were reprehensible, unthinkable. The next morning, Clara made a firm decision to avoid Lucas at all costs. She left the house early, telling Julia she was going to the market. She spent several hours wandering aimlessly around the city, trying to organize her thoughts. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His gaze, his words, everything seemed etched into her memory. Returning home, she found Lucas alone in the living room. Julia was out on errands, and Clara knew she couldn't avoid this conversation. She tried to walk past him, but he called out to her, "Clara, please, we need to talk." She stopped but didn't turn around. "Lucas, this has to stop. We can't." Before she could finish her sentence, he approached her. "I know it's wrong, Clara. I know, but I can't pretend I don't feel anything." He was too close, and Clara felt she didn't have the strength to resist. The ensuing silence was filled with surging emotions. Before she could fully comprehend anything, Lucas kissed her. The kiss was fleeting, almost timid, but filled with everything they had both suppressed for so long. Clara instantly pulled away, overcome with fright. "This must not happen again, Lucas. Never." She left the living room, leaving him alone, but she knew that moment had changed everything. In the following days, Clara and Lucas barely spoke. Both were aware of what had happened, but neither dared to bring up the topic again. Julia noticed that something had changed but attributed it to stress. Clara, meanwhile, began to withdraw more and more. She spent most of her time in her room or in the garden, trying to avoid any interaction with Lucas. But every time she saw him, her heart ached. She understood that her feelings for him were reprehensible, but she couldn't get rid of him. Lucas also seemed troubled. He tried to act normal, but Clara saw an internal struggle in his eyes. It seemed he wanted to say something but held back. The silence between them became almost unbearable, and Clara knew it was only a matter of time before everything resurfaced. That evening, when Julia had already fallen asleep, Clara went down to the kitchen. She needed to be alone to try and clear her mind. Entering, she saw Lucas sitting at the table, staring into space. He looked up when she entered and opened his mouth to say something, but Clara raised her hand, stopping him. "Please, don't say anything, Lucas. Just leave me alone." He remained silent but didn't leave. Instead, he stood up and approached her. "I can't, Clara. I can't ignore this." She looked at him, and her eyes filled with tears. "But we must, Lucas. For Julia's sake. For our own sakes." The tension between them reached its peak, while Julia began to notice the growing distance between her mother and husband. She didn't understand what was happening, but Clara evaded her questions, and Julia, not believing her explanations, began to observe them more closely, noticing small details that had previously escaped her attention. Julia realized she was in an unbearable situation. She needed to make a decision before everything fell apart. But she couldn't make a decision because the consequences of following these feelings could be catastrophic. Lucas, in turn, was determined to talk to Clara. He knew he could no longer live in silence and suppress his emotions. That night, he decided to confront it head-on, but he didn't realize it would have serious consequences for Clara. Every time she saw Julia and Lucas together, a wave of guilt washed over her, as if she had been struck in the heart. She tried to keep her distance from Lucas, but it was impossible to ignore what had happened between them. And what was worse, she understood that Lucas was not ready to bury these feelings. One morning, Clara was alone in the kitchen when Lucas suddenly appeared. His demeanor betrayed an inner tension, as if he was steeling himself for an important declaration. "Clara, we need to talk," he said in a hushed voice. Trying to avoid the unwelcome conversation, she focused on washing dishes, but Lucas moved closer. We can't go on like this. I refuse to keep pretending that nothing happened. In response, Clara, without looking up, exclaimed, "Lucas, for heaven's sake, this has to stop." But Lucas didn't give up. "I know you feel the same way. We can't just ignore what happened." Before the conversation could develop further, Julia walked into the kitchen. Clara and Lucas instantly recoiled from each other, but Julia caught the unnatural atmosphere. She frowned warily but said nothing. Clara realized her daughter was starting to notice something was amiss. Julia clearly felt the tension that had arisen between Clara and Lucas. Small details, previously unnoticed, now became obvious: avoided eye contact, awkward silences, and a reluctance to be alone together. At first, she tried to ignore these signs, but her intuition told her something was being hidden. One afternoon, as Clara was washing dishes, Julia unexpectedly entered the kitchen. "Mom, are you okay? You've seemed distant lately." Clara forced a smile and replied, "I'm fine. I'm just tired, it's been a tough week." Julia nodded but continued to look at her suspiciously. It wasn't just tiredness, something more was hidden beneath the surface. That same night, Julia decided to talk to Lucas. While watching TV, she asked, "Have you noticed Mom acting strange? It seems like she's avoiding you?" Lucas, caught off guard, stammered before replying, "I haven't noticed anything like that. Maybe she's just worried about something?" However, his evasive answer made Julia feel he was hiding something. In the following days, Julia began to observe the interactions between Lucas and Clara more closely. She noticed the tension between them became almost palpable whenever they were in the same room. It was as if an invisible connection existed between them, one no one but Julia could sense, but she felt it very keenly. Clara grew increasingly nervous. She felt Julia was constantly watching her, as if waiting for the right moment to talk. Lucas, on the other hand, was determined to talk to Clara, even though he knew it only increased the risk of exposure. One day, as Clara was tidying things in the hallway closet, Lucas approached her. "Clara, we need to talk. I can't pretend anymore that this isn't destroying me." Clara looked at him with alarm. "Lucas, not now. Julia's home. Please, leave me alone." Lucas insisted, "Do you think this is easy for me? I love Julia, but what I feel for you is something I've never experienced before. I can't just ignore it." Clara tried to respond, but Julia's footsteps echoed down the hall, and they quickly moved apart. Julia found them by the closet but said nothing, only giving them a look that clearly indicated her suspicions were growing. Clara began to isolate herself even more. She spent hours in her room, pretending to be busy reading or doing chores. But in reality, she was trying to avoid any contact with Lucas. Julia, meanwhile, grew increasingly suspicious. Her questions, such as "You seem so distracted, Mom," or "Lucas, you've been different lately," created a stifling atmosphere in the house. One evening at dinner, Julia asked a question that caught Clara off guard. "Is there something you two need to tell me?" Clara choked on her food, and Lucas looked away. Julia laughed nervously. "I'm just kidding, guys. You've both been so tense lately." But deep down, she knew there was more to it. After dinner, Clara decided she needed to talk to Lucas. This couldn't go on. She found him alone in the living room. "Lucas, this has to end. I can't do this to my daughter." He looked at her with a pained expression. "Do you think I want this, Clara? I didn't choose these feelings." Before they could continue their conversation, Julia walked into the living room. The silence between Clara and Lucas was so heavy that Julia instantly sensed something was wrong. One afternoon, Julia decided to come home early from work to surprise Lucas and Clara. Upon arriving home, she found them in the living room. At first glance, the situation seemed innocent, they were just talking. But the way Clara quickly pulled away and Lucas avoided looking at her only intensified Julia's suspicions. "You're hiding something from me, aren't you?" Julia asked directly. Clara tried to smile and deflect. "Of course not, dear. We were just discussing home renovations." Julia didn't believe her but decided not to press the issue at that moment. Instead, she began to observe even more carefully, determined to find out what was happening at all costs. That fateful night, while Lucas was asleep, Julia, succumbing to her nagging suspicions, took a desperate step. She examined the contents of his mobile phone. Although her search yielded no concrete results, her inner turmoil only intensified. She was certain that sooner or later, the veil of secrecy would be torn away, and the truth would come to light. Throughout the week, Julia was in a state of emotional turmoil, torn between doubt and attempts to convince herself that her suspicions were unfounded. However, her intuition, like a nagging cricket, gave her no peace. The slightest details in the interactions between Clara and Lucas did not escape her notice, whether it was Clara's avoiding gaze or Lucas's deliberate maintenance of distance. These subtle nuances poisoned her existence, robbing her of peace and sleep. One day, yielding to a sudden impulse, Julia decided to return home from work without warning. Entering the house, she was met by an ominous silence. Walking into the living room, she heard muffled voices coming from the hallway. Approaching cautiously, she froze in shock, hearing fragments of an argument between Clara and Lucas. The conversation was in hushed tones, but Julia managed to make out a few phrases that pierced her heart like a dagger. "Lucas, this has to stop. We can't keep playing this game." "I know, Clara, but I can't stop. I can't silence my feelings." Julia's heart pounded wildly, like a caged bird. She felt betrayed, as if she had been punched in the gut. Unable to bear the agonizing weight any longer, she burst into the room, interrupting their conversation. Clara and Lucas instantly recoiled from each other, but it was too late. Julia couldn't help but notice the panic reflected in their eyes. "What's going on here? What are you hiding from me?" she demanded insistently. Clara tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Lucas remained silent, unable to meet Julia's gaze. "I'll find out the truth anyway. Don't think you can keep pulling the wool over my eyes," she declared, determined to get to the bottom of it. Clara spent a sleepless night, tormented by a guilty conscience. She knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. Julia was already suspicious, and further delay would only worsen the situation. The next morning, Clara made the difficult decision to tell everything, even if it led to catastrophic consequences. She called Julia into her room for a serious talk. Sitting on the bed, her hands trembling with nervousness, Clara began, "My daughter, there's something I need to tell you. You deserve to know the truth, no matter how painful it is." Julia frowned, crossing her arms. "I'm listening," she replied, bracing herself for the worst. Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself before continuing, I've started to have feelings for Lucas. I don't know when it started, but I desperately tried to fight it. I always knew it was wrong and tried to avoid him, but one day I couldn't resist." Julia froze in stunned silence, trying to process what she had heard. Then, as if a dam had burst, rage consumed her. "Are you saying my own mother betrayed my trust with my husband? How could you do this to me?" she screamed, unable to contain her overwhelming emotions. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she tried to explain, "I never wanted to hurt you, Julia. I feel terrible about what happened." "And Lucas? Does he feel the same way?" Julia asked, her voice trembling. Clara hesitated before replying, He feels something too, but we never went further than kissing." Julia's anger reached its peak. "That's enough to destroy everything. Mom, I can't even look at you right now," she cried, and ran out of the room, leaving Clara alone, tormented by guilt and remorse. That same night, Julia confronted Lucas. She found him in his makeshift home office, sitting in front of his laptop. "Lucas, my mom told me everything. I want to hear it from you." "Is it true?" she demanded. Lucas tried to justify himself, but he knew no words could mitigate his guilt. "Julia, I never wanted to hurt you, but yes, it's true. I got too close to your mother, and it got out of hand," he confessed, lowering his head. Lucas's words were like knife thrusts to Julia's heart. "You're my husband. I should have trusted you more than anyone. How could you do this to me, and with my mother, of all people?" she cried in despair. Lucas tried to approach her, but Julia raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't touch me. You've ruined everything we had," she said, tears streaming down her face, but her anger was stronger. "I want you to leave now," she ordered. Lucas tried to object, but Julia gave him no chance. He packed his bags that same night and left the house, leaving Julia and Clara to deal with the wreckage of a relationship that seemed beyond repair. After Lucas left, the house plunged into oppressive silence and despair. Julia barely spoke to Clara, spending her days locked in her room or outside the house. Clara, meanwhile, fell into deep sorrow, realizing she might never regain her daughter's trust. One afternoon, Julia finally broke the silence. "I can't be here anymore, Mom. Every corner of this house reminds me of what you and Lucas did. I need space." Clara begged Julia to stay, but she knew it was futile. Her daughter's decision was final. Before leaving, Julia spoke words that would forever remain in Clara's memory. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, but right now, I just need distance. I need to learn to live without feeling this pain every time I look at you." Clara watched her daughter leave with a suitcase in hand, departing from a house that now felt empty and lifeless. The days Clara spent in the house were filled with oppressive silence. Lucas returned only once, to pick up some belongings.